celebrating our centennial year at Canterbury, we're looking back to our history in order to appreciate the Canterbury of today. In the same way, it's valuable to look back at history in the world to acknowledge what we have in today's world. Our speaker today is a survivor of the Holocaust during World War II. We are very lucky to have this opportunity to hear such an inspiring and historical speaker. It is my honor to introduce a life-affirming and energetic speaker, Miss Esther Bauer.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Two things I want to say before. I have macular degeneration and I cannot recognize faces anymore. And number two, I can only tell you what happened to me personally. There were many other stories, all true, but I can only talk about myself. Well, I was born 91 years ago in Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg is a beautiful city, 2 million people, and Americans always go to Munich and to Berchtesgaden, but nobody ever comes to Hamburg. Hamburg has 2,300 bridges. It's more than Venice and more than Amsterdam. But now enough commercial for Hamburg. My maiden name was Jonas, like the Jonas Brothers, but we are not related. And my father was Dr. Alberto Jonas. He was the principal of the Jewish girls' school in Hamburg. According to Jewish law, children are only Jewish if the mother is Jewish, because you always know who the mother is, but you don't always know who the father is. So the old Jews were quite smart. Well, my father was very Orthodox. My mother was a physician, and in World War I, she was a Red Cross nurse on the German side, and in 1934, she got a medal from the Hitler government thanking her for her service in World War I, and 10 years later, they killed her in Auschwitz. Anyway, so, and there were already soldiers in the First World War who did not want to be taken care of by a Jewish nurse. So anti-Semitism goes way back in Germany. Well, my childhood was like any other middle-class child. I was roller skating on the street. I had 2 non-Jewish girlfriends, Hilda and Eva, and they stuck with me all the time, even during the war. And we met again after the war, and they were always my friends. The neighbors Hitler came to power when I was 9 years old, and at first the neighbors still greeted us friendly, and then they stopped greeting us, but nobody accosted me ever. So slowly new laws came when Hitler was chancellor. Jewish children were not allowed to go to public schools anymore. Jewish employees had to leave their jobs. Jewish teachers had to teach only in Jewish schools. There were 2 big Jewish schools in Hamburg. My father's school with 600 girls, and the Talmud Torah school for the boys. I don't remember how many were there, but at least 600, if not more. And then one day we were told we cannot go to concerts anymore, we cannot go to the opera, we couldn't go swimming anymore, and I loved to go swimming. And things became progressively worse. One day we had to wear the Jewish star on our clothing, a yellow star that said Jew in the middle. And also we had to have it on the door, door to our apartment. And one morning I come to the park where I always went through to go to the subway. There was a big sign, Jews not allowed. And I was very friendly with the guy who took care of this. And he said, I'm sorry, Miss Esther, but you cannot come in here anymore. But the first day I wore the star, I come into the subway and the man got up and said, please sit down. That happened too. There were not only bad Germans, there were also good Germans. My baby nurse, for instance, she was wonderful. She was not Jewish, and she came to us at night and really risked her life to bring us some food or some stocking stuff we couldn't get anymore. We were not allowed to go to a store. They opened a so-called Jewish store for us. And then one day, Jews had to take a Jewish name. Like my father's name was Alberto, as I told you. I don't know how he got that name, because his brother was Siegfried. That's about as German as this comes. And he had to buy the name Israel, and women had to buy the name Sarah. Now, I was born Esther Sarah, so my parents didn't have to buy the name for me, but my mother became Dr. Marie Anna Sarah Jonas. And what did I forget?
The super coming to your apartment.
Yeah, our superintendent in the building where we lived was very nice. He would ring our doorbell and say very loud, anything wrong here again, or something wrong here again, and then he closed the door and shook my father's hand, and they would listen to Radio Luxembourg, which was anti-Nazi. And then on the holiest day of the Jewish religion, Yom Kippur, it was announced in the synagogues, you have to go home now and bring your radios to the next police station. My father, who was very Orthodox, said to my mother and me, you go, he is going to stay in synagogue. So we had no more radio then. And like I said, things got progressively worse.
Couldn't go to movies.
You couldn't go to the movies, you couldn't go, like I said, everything was forbidden. And my classmates started to immigrate, and at the beginning of 1939, my 9th year in school, we were about 40 girls, and at the end there were 3 left, 2 and me, and the other 2 were unfortunately murdered. Well, one day we had to move from our nice apartment to a so-called Jewish apartment. It was next to an orphanage where some of the employees had lived. It was a terrible apartment, no central heating, no hot water, but my mother knew how to light a stove, because she had been in, like I said, in World War I, and she knew how. My father and I couldn't have done it. And so we lived there for about 3/4 of a year. In the meantime, all my friends had immigrated or were sent to camps. There was the so-called Kindertransport. I don't know if you've heard of that. There were children's transports to England. England accepted a couple of thousand of Jewish children, not their parents, only the children. And my father took 2 of those transports to London. I wasn't allowed to go because he said I would take the place of another child. So I wound up in Auschwitz. Anyway, one day we were told, you are going to a camp called Theresienstadt, or Terezin in Czech. And it was in Czechoslovakia. It was a former garrison town for the Czech military. And my father had to report to the Gestapo. I don't know if you know what the Gestapo was. It was the secret police of the Nazis. And unfortunately, I say this man was very nice to my father. He didn't say, "You miserable Jew." He said, "Dr. Jonas, sit down." And on the station to go to Terezin, he was there, and I heard him say to my father, I was 18 at the time, "Don't worry, Dr. Jonas, you will have your school again in Terezin. You'll see how nice it is there." And the next day my father had to shovel coal. No school, of course. And he died 6 weeks later of meningitis. But I must tell you how we got into this camp. There was no train station yet.
3 suitcases.
Yeah, each one was allowed 1 suitcase. And my mother and me carried those 3 suitcases. My father, like I said, was not a trained man, physically trained. And we go through the gate of Terezin, and from 1 minute to the next we were prisoners. And we had to put our luggage on the court. They were like stone barracks, 4-sided, with a stone
Area.
stone, what do you call it? A Hof.
Courtyard.
The courtyard, sorry. And we had to put our luggage there, and we were told we will get it later. Needless to say, we never saw it again. Well, we had to go by, everybody in Terezin was Jewish at that time when we got there. And we walked by the kitchen. We had to go up on the attic, and there stood a young man. I was 18 years old and not too bad looking, and I knew he would come after me. And so we go up to the attic, stone floor, dirty, no tables, no chairs, no mattresses, nothing but that dirty stone floor. And there we had to sit and sleep, and it was awful. And the worst part were the latrines. They were just wooden slats, men, women, children together. It was just awful. Well, this young man comes, doesn't speak a word of German. I, of course, don't speak a word of Czech, so we couldn't talk to each other, but he called some people over and they interpreted for us, and I made up my mind, I'm going to learn the language, which I did later. And this young man saved my life. And my father died, and I got very sick with double pneumonia. My mother wasn't allowed to work as a doctor anymore in Germany, but in Terezin they made her a doctor again, a physician. But she had hardly any medicine. She really couldn't help me when I had this high fever. And this newfound friend Hansa was able to get me into a sick room where they did have medicine, and after a few days I was better already, and then I got a relapse of high fever again, and Hansa went through the whole city, which he wasn't allowed yet at that time. You could only go to work and back. Later you could walk in the city. And he gave out the food and gave me right away 2 portions of rotten potatoes. It was awful. I couldn't even eat one. And later on the food got a little better, but not very much. But he was in the kitchen and he was able to steal some bread or something for my mother and me. And and that helped, of course, a lot. Also, he was able to get my mother and me into a smaller room, not into one of those barracks where they had 3 beds above each other, and there were 5 very nice women there, and we also had a toilet, like a regular flush toilet, and but only water you could put into. No sink, it was just some water to wash yourself with. And
You got sick again. Got a relapse.
I told them.
No. When he went out, got the doctor. You got a relapse. And he went look for a doctor.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. He was looking for the doctor of this sick room, and he found her and brought her back. And she gave me an injection and said if she would have come 2 hours later, I probably wouldn't be alive anymore. And so I owe this man my life. And he also was able to get me a job in an office. I didn't have to work in the fields or in factories, which were terrible conditions. People got very, very sick there. And it was the youth organization. Terezin was a camp where people came in and people were sent out, mainly to the death in the east. And I got a job there to write down every child under 18. I was already 18, so I didn't have to live in a youth home, but everybody under 18, I had to write their name, where they came from, when they were born, their last address, with pencil on an index card. And if that child was sent out again, probably to his death or her death, and I had to erase it. We didn't have that many cards. And I did this for 2 years. And one of my co-workers was a former teacher, and he taught me how to speak Czech. So finally I could talk to Honza in his language. And men and women were strictly separated. And after 2 years, we were told, he was told that he was going on a transport to build up a new ghetto near Dresden. That's another German town. And we decided to get married. You could get married, you couldn't live together, but you could get married, and you were told after the war you have to renew the vows, but they would be 3 dated to that date. We didn't care, we just got married. And after 3 days, Honza left. Well, a few weeks later, the women of these men were told, you can go voluntarily after your husband. And I said, my mother was still alive, and she said, stay here, don't go. But I always do what my insides tell me, and my insides said, you go. Well, to say goodbye to your mother is always hard, but I was looking forward to seeing Honza again. And we are sitting in the train, just a third-class train, and I see Polish names, and I knew we were not going to Dresden, but to Auschwitz. Now, Auschwitz, to explain in a few words, is impossible. It was the worst camp of all of them. We knew all about Auschwitz because somebody had come back, I don't know how, but had come back and told us all about it. Well, there stood that Dr. Mengele, which I found out later, only with his dogs, and he said, you go right. And my good friend, there were also other people, not only the women of these men. My friend who taught me Czech went to the left. Well, we come by a barrack, and people came out and said, if you have any bread or anything to eat left over, please throw it over the fence because they will take it away from you. Well, a lady next to me threw her bread over and was shot dead immediately right next to me. It could have hit me, but it hit her. Well, we went into the shower and we thought that is the end because we knew they killed the people in the shower. Well, they shaved off our hair, they took everything away from us, not that we had much, but whatever it was. I had a watch yet from Hamburg, and I threw it on the floor because I didn't want the Nazis to have it working. And we went into the shower and expected, well, that is the end, but water came. And they gave us very flimsy clothing. It was October 44. And it was cold, and the Nazis were crazy about counting. We had to stand for hours and hours to be counted. Anyway, it rained on us, it snowed on us. We had nothing on the head. We had no handkerchief. We had just very light clothing, but nobody got sick. Well, after about 2 weeks, we were told, at night, they took the people out of other barracks and drove them in trucks by our barrack to the gas chamber, and they knew where they were going, and they were screaming, and I can hear that today yet, and also the smell of Auschwitz, the burning flesh. It was just horrible, horrible, horrible. Well, about 2 weeks later, we were told, you go into the shower now. Well, we figured that is the end. But water came. And they gave me one underpants, one thin dress, like a summer dress, one very thin coat, wooden shoes, no socks, no stockings, nothing, no handkerchief, nothing, just and the shaved of hair, nothing to put on the hair. And we were put into trains again and landed in Freiburg in Saxony, that is near Dresden. And of course I tried to see Honza in Auschwitz, but that was impossible. Well, we did not get a number in Auschwitz because we were either supposed to be killed or sent out again. Why waste the ink on us? So we were 1,000 women, 500 Polish girls, 400 Czechs, and 100 German Jewish women. And we built airplanes in Freiburg. In Freiburg, we come into the main hall, and there are beds, wooden beds, and always 2 girls to 1 bed. And I asked the one next to me, I didn't know her, you want to, okay. So we had to share the bed, and when the light went out, the bed bugs and the fleas and the lice, you cannot imagine. Today you go to a drugstore if you itch and you get some cortisone, but we had absolutely nothing. And but after a few weeks, they built us barracks outside the city, and there were no more bugs. Anyway, we worked 12 hours a day. We had to get the rivets out of the steam, and there stood the SS man and beat us with his leather belt, and we had to go every hour and get these rivets out of there. One girl had an air hammer and one girl had a piece of iron, and that's how we built airplanes at the time. The only act of sabotage I was able to do to make the rivets either too short or too long, they couldn't check that because when you're in an airplane and on the wings you see these little flaps go up and down. That's what I worked on. And that was fully closed, and the Nazis couldn't see that we did sabotage. Anyway, we did that for about 9 months. In the meantime, our hair had grown again, and we got no more raw material, and we had to stand there and take pieces of aluminum and just file it down. When the Nazis came to check on us, they saw that we were working, but we didn't accomplish anything. But I was able to make myself a comb, and I still have that in my safe in New York. So
You marched in from the camp all the time. Every morning, when you marched in with the grass.
yeah, well, we were so hungry. We got one piece of bread in the morning that had to last you all day. Then we got a watery soup for lunch and a watery soup for dinner. And I had a very nice elderly German foreman who was very nice to me, and he sometimes put a piece of bread in my station, which was very much appreciated, of course. And
Grass. Grass.
yeah, and when we walked from those barracks outside the city to the factory, we grabbed the grass because we were so terribly hungry. We ate the grass. Well,
You had to go to the bathroom.
yeah, there were not only SS men, but there were also SS women, and they were worse than the men. You had to stand at attention and say, "May I go to the bathroom?" And if that bitch didn't want to, you couldn't go all day to the bathroom. Well, I mean, you just cannot imagine these.
No toilet.
There was no toilet paper, there was no toothbrush, no toothpaste, nothing, no soap, no towel, nothing. I washed out my underpants in cold water without anything and put it on the heating that was right next to my station, and in the evening I put it on again. Well, that lasted about 9 months, and then we were told,
You heard the shooting from both sides.
well, we heard the shooting from the Russians and from the Allies on the left, but our factory was never hit, unfortunately. We wanted them to hit our factory, but it never happened. So here we go into the train again. There were open coal cars, and you just had enough room for your behind. You couldn't lie down, you could only sit. And we thought we are going back to Auschwitz. Luckily, we didn't know that, not luckily, but we didn't know that Auschwitz was already liberated by the Russians in January, and this was April 1945. And my friend Charlotte, with whom I had to share the bed, said to me, at night the trains stood still. She said, "Tomorrow I'm going to jump over." We were in Czechoslovakia at the time, and she said, "Come with me." I said, "No, the Germans will know I'm Jewish, the Czechs will know I'm German, it's a no-win situation." So she jumped over, and I heard shooting, and I was sure that she was dead. Well, we go on further and further. Nobody had room for 1,000 women. And finally, we came to Mauthausen in Austria, an awful, awful man's camp. They had one barrack empty, and we were put in there. This camp was also one of the worst. It was a stone quarry, and the barracks were on top of the hill, and on the bottom was the stone quarry. And the Nazis just threw the men into that, where the stone quarry was, and when they came down, they were dead already. It was a terrible, terrible camp. But they had a barrack for us, and again I had to share the bed with another girl, and she died during the night, and all the vermin goes on the life body, so I had all that stuff again. But one morning I hear them say, oh, the Nazis are all gone. I couldn't believe it, but they were gone. And a little later, the Americans came up the hill with a
Tank.
with a tank and liberated us. It was, of course, one of the happiest days of my life. Well, they nursed me back to health, and I had only 9 years of school. That's all I was allowed at the time. I had to do forced labor after the 9 years. I worked in a factory for a couple of years till they sent us to Theresienstadt. Anyway, where was
Well, you meant that the guy asked you, who are you from?
Yeah, and the first American soldier I met said to me in the most beautiful Hamburg German, well, miss, where are you from? I said, from Hamburg. He said, so am I. He was a refugee who had come to America in 1938 and was in the army. He was able to go to one of those SS women and take everything away from her, and I got a beautiful suit, I remember it well, a green wool suit with a black fur collar I wore for years yet. Anyway, after we were liberated, a couple of weeks later, the Russians took over the camp, and some friends and I moved to Linz on the Danube. Now in Austria and in Germany you have to be registered at the police every time, and I registered in that apartment, but then we decided to move to a DP camp, which is displaced persons, not only Jews, they were Polish workers, they were Russian workers, they were forced by the Nazis to work, and there we didn't have to pay rent, and we got a little more to eat. And a friend of mine from Hamburg had heard that I was liberated there, and he had a friend with a small truck, and they went from army post to army post to beg for gasoline. You couldn't buy any at that time. And they came to the border and were told, we give you 24 hours to find me.
The Austrian border. The Austrian border.
The Austrian border, right. And they told him 24 hours. He went to the police and got the address in the apartment where I didn't live anymore. He was half Jewish, and he was only 6 months in the camp. And he had a picture of me and went with this picture from store to store, and finally found me in that DP camp. And when he came there, Esther was in the movies, of course, on the Saturday. I worked there, and Saturday I went to the movies. Well, anyway, I went back with them to Hamburg, and in Hamburg I wanted the apartment back that the Nazi had thrown us out of, and then the British said, no, you can have one room in the apartment with that Nazi still in it. I said, no, thank you, and I moved to Bremen, which was American enclave. Anyway, I found my uncle again in America, and he sent me an affidavit of support, and I was on the second boat after the war to come to New York. And in New York, a girlfriend had found me and took me home in Washington Heights. We had a wonderful dinner, and then we went for ice cream, and her boyfriend was there, and a buddy from the army. And in Hamburg I had found out that my mother was murdered and that my husband was murdered, so I was all alone. And this buddy of her boyfriend said to me, "Are you the girl that just came from Germany?" I said, "Yeah, this morning." He said, "I pictured you quite differently. You don't have pigtails." No, I couldn't have had because they shaved off our hair. And you speak English, yes. Well, I'll make it short. I married him 2 years later, and I have 1 son and 2 grandchildren, and I now live with my boy toy, Bill. Okay, questions?
Any questions? Ask again any questions.
Any questions? No?
My name is Zaki. As a kid growing up, I used to watch a movie called Escape from Cbury. I don't know about watching that movie, but after watching that movie, I cried a lot because I realized how people were mistreated and how life was back then. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel like we the youth now to appreciate the life that happened years ago? Because we think that everything is easy for us. We never had to pass through what we passed through. And how do you think we should appreciate life now? Because looking at the movie I watched, things where it looks like very difficult for people who be back then during the test. I don't really know how much we should appreciate life now.
I don't know about the show.
Oh, how I survived? Well, I was already like 20 years in America when I had a sickness that was called psychosomatic, and I had to see a psychiatrist. And the first question was, do you feel guilty that you were liberated and 6 million were murdered? I said, no, I'm one of 1,000 women and some are still alive. And none of us were killed. People died, of course, because there was no medical help. But, and then he was, I said, no, I don't feel guilty. But then the second question was, do you think you need therapy? And I said, look, I don't want to sound like all crazy people. If you think I need therapy, I will take it. But personally, I don't think I need it. He said, well, I agree with you, but I want to tell you something. You live in a shell. You let nothing touch you, and that is how you survived.
Tell the Schnooper story.
Okay. I love classical music, and I have a friend who is subscribed to the Philharmonic and in New York, and if her friend doesn't go, I buy the ticket. And she calls one day, says, you want to go? I said, yes. And I didn't even ask what the program was because they always smuggle a modern piece in the middle, and I wanted to hear the last piece. And it was Beethoven and Mozart and a composer called Schnittke. I had never heard of Mr. Schnittke, nor did I like his music, but that's unimportant. A few days later, I call my hairdresser. There are 2 Italian brothers who have a store together. They don't talk to each other. Very funny. And I called him. I said, Luigi, may I come today? He says, yeah, come this afternoon at 3. So I walk in. They cut men, women, children, dogs, whatever has hair. And he was cutting a man's hair, and I hear the name Schnittke. Well, I said to myself, I have to
Mix yourself in.
yeah, I have to talk to him. And Bill would say, yes, of course you had to talk to him. And
Right.
He was married to a woman from Stuttgart, which is another German city, an American. And I said, have you ever been to Stuttgart? He says, have I ever been? I drove my tank through there in 1945. Well, then I knew he was with the American Army. I said, and I was liberated in Austria by the Americans. And he jumps up, he says, May 5, 1945, Mauthausen? I said, yes. He said, I liberated you.
Any more questions?
Any more questions? Well, in 1968, after I married my second husband, he comes with the mail one day and says, you have a letter from a Charlotte Stein. I said, that can't be, she is dead. That was my friend with whom I shared the bed. And they shot after her, but they didn't hit her. And the Czechs helped her to go back to her hometown. And she did find her husband again. And they went to Palestine at the time. And she played bridge with a former teacher of the Talmud Torah school in Hamburg. And when she heard Hamburg, she said, oh, I had such a good friend. Whatever happened to her? And he said, I'll get you her address. And so she wrote to me, and in 1970 we went to Israel and visited her, and that was, of course, wonderful. Unfortunately, she died in the meantime.
Okay, let's